"This is your captain speaking. We have a situation. If there is anyone on board with military flight experience, please identify yourself to the crew immediately." Those words cut through the darkness of the cabin like a blade, sharp and urgent, the kind of announcement that makes every passenger's blood run cold. Chicago to London. The red-eye flight had been cutting through the night sky at 35,000 feet, cabin lights dimmed to a soft blue glow. Most passengers already surrendered to sleep, with blankets pulled up to their chins and eye masks blocking out the world. Then the plane lurched. Not the gentle turbulence that makes you grip your armrest for a moment before returning to your magazine. This was violent, sudden, the kind of drop that sends loose items flying and makes your stomach leap into your throat. A woman somewhere in the back screamed. Overhead, bins rattled like they might break open. The seatbelt sign blinked on with a harsh, insistent chime. And then came that announcement. Row 8. Seat A. A man blinked awake, stubble darkening his jaw, hoodie worn thin at the elbows from years of use. His daughter was asleep against his shoulder, her small body curled into his side like she belonged there, which she did. He looked like every other exhausted parent flying economy, the kind of person you glance past without a second thought, the kind of person who fades into the background of airport terminals and airplane cabins. The flight attendant moved through the aisle with controlled urgency, her eyes scanning the business class section, first searching for someone who looked the part. A pilot, perhaps, or a military officer, someone with authority written in their posture and confidence in their gaze. She passed row 8 without slowing down. In first class, a woman with elegant blonde hair and a stunning red dress glanced back toward economy. Her eyes landed briefly on the man in 8A, took in the hoodie and the cheap backpack stuffed under the seat in front of him, and she turned away. Whatever help they needed, it certainly was not coming from back there. But that man's hands. 9 years ago, those hands knew something most people will never understand. They had gripped the controls of an F-16 in the dead of night, had landed crippled aircraft in conditions that would make most pilots freeze, had earned him a call sign whispered with respect throughout his squadron. Tonight, those hands might be the only reason anyone on this plane gets home. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you are watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. 2 hours before the flight, O'Hare International Airport was the usual chaos of humanity in motion. Travelers dragged oversized suitcases across polished floors. Business people barked into phones about meetings and deadlines. Families herded children toward gates with the exhausted determination of people who had been traveling too long and still had hours to go. Nathan Cole stood in the economy check-in line with 2 small backpacks at his feet. One his one, belonging to the 7-year-old girl beside him. Emma clutched a worn teddy bear against her chest, the kind of bear that had clearly been loved to the point of falling apart. The fur was matted in places, rubbed bare in others, and one eye hung loose by a thread that Emma refused to let anyone fix because she was afraid the bear would not look the same afterward. The bear's name was Mr. Buttons, and he had been a gift from Emma's mother before she died. Emma tugged on Nathan's sleeve, looking up at the departure board with wide, curious eyes that saw adventure where adults saw nothing but delays and discomfort. "Dad, how come we did not get seats by the window?" Nathan smiled down at her, the kind of tired but genuine smile that comes from a parent who has learned to find joy in small moments. "Because I know you will fall asleep on my shoulder anyway, sweetheart. Saved us $50. I will get you that birthday present you have been asking about next month." Emma considered this trade-off with the seriousness of a 7-year-old weighing the merits of immediate gratification against future rewards. She hugged Mr. Buttons tighter and nodded, apparently deciding the birthday present was worth the sacrifice. They moved through security with the practiced efficiency of people who travel light, Nathan helping Emma remove her shoes and place Mr. Buttons in the plastic bin, with a solemnity that suggested the bear deserved his own security screening. On the other side, they found seats in the waiting area near their gate, a patch of uncomfortable chairs facing a wall of windows that looked out onto the tarmac, where planes taxied and took off into the gray November sky. Nathan opened his laptop, pulling up a few lines of code for a project due Monday. Software engineering was not glamorous work, not the kind of career that impressed people at parties or earned you admiring glances from strangers, but it paid the bills and let him work from home most days, which meant he could be there when Emma got off the school bus, could help with homework and make dinner, and be present in all the ways that mattered. Emma sat beside him, legs swinging, because they were not quite long enough to reach the floor. Mr. Buttons perched on her lap like a small, ragged guardian. She watched the planes outside for a while, then turned to look at her father with the directness that children have before they learn to hide their fears. Dad, is the plane scary? Nathan closed the laptop, immediately giving her his full attention, because that was what Catherine would have done, what Catherine always did. He turned to face his daughter, saw the worry hiding behind her curiosity, and felt his heart squeeze the way it always did when Emma reminded him so much of her mother. You know what I used to do before I became an engineer? Emma shook her head, blonde hair swishing across her shoulders. Nathan's voice went quiet, almost wistful. I used to fly. Big planes, small planes, fast planes that could touch the edge of space. He paused, watching her eyes go wide with surprise. But I gave that up because I found something more important. Now my most important job is being your dad. And I promise, sweetheart, I will always be right here with you, no matter what happens. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer the way children are satisfied when they trust completely in their parents' ability to make everything okay. She leaned her head against his arm. Mr. Buttons nestled between them, and Nathan felt the familiar ache of loving someone so much it terrified him. Across the waiting area, an older Vietnamese woman struggled with a heavy suitcase, trying to lift it onto a luggage cart, with arms that trembled from the effort. She looked around for help, but most people were absorbed in their phones or their conversations, the particular blindness of busy travelers who have learned not to see the struggles of strangers. Nathan stood without thinking about it, crossing the waiting area in a few quick strides. He lifted the suitcase easily and placed it on the cart for her, the kind of casual strength that came from years of physical training, even if those years were behind him now. The woman smiled up at him, her English hesitant but warm. Thank you. Very kind. No problem, ma'am. Have a safe flight. When he returned to his seat, Emma was watching him with those bright, knowing eyes that seemed to see everything. You are really nice, Dad. Nathan ruffled her hair, settling back into the uncomfortable airport chair. Just trying to help, sweetheart. It was a small moment, the kind that happens in airports every day and is forgotten just as quickly. But it was also the kind of moment that revealed character, that showed who a person really was when no one important was watching. Nathan Cole was the kind of man who helped old women with their luggage and kept promises to dying wives and gave up everything he had once been to become the father his daughter needed. He just did not know that in a few hours the world would need him to remember who he used to be. Boarding began 20 minutes later with the usual hierarchy of air travel on full display. First-class passengers lined up in their own special lane, clutching leather bags and wearing the casual confidence of people who expected the world to accommodate them. Business class followed suits and laptops and the harried energy of people who would work through the flight because time was money, and there was never enough of either. Nathan and Emma waited in the economy line, surrounded by families and students and budget travelers who had learned to pack everything they needed into bags that would fit in overhead bins. A man in a tailored blazer walked past, distracted by his phone, and bumped into Nathan's shoulder without looking up. The man's name was Bradley Thornton, and he was the kind of wealthy businessman who had stopped seeing people like Nathan years ago. He glanced up just long enough to register the hoodie, the stubble, the cheap backpack, and then kept walking without a word of apology. In his world, people like Nathan were background noise, part of the scenery rather than individuals worthy of acknowledgement. Nathan did not react, did not call after him, or mutter under his breath. He simply placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder and guided her forward as the line moved. Behind Thornton came a woman who commanded attention even in the crowded airport terminal. Olivia Bennett had blonde hair that fell in elegant waves past her shoulders, and she wore a stunning red dress that fit her, like it had been made specifically for her body, which it had. Pearl earrings caught the light as she moved, and her designer heels clicked against the floor with the purposeful rhythm of someone who had places to be and deals to close. She was on her phone speaking rapidly about tomorrow's presentation, stress evident in the tension of her shoulders despite the confidence of her voice. "I understand the stakes, David. I have been preparing for this for 6 months. The London account is going to happen." As she passed Nathan and Emma, Olivia's eyes swept over them in the automatic assessment that busy professionals make of their surroundings. She saw a tired man in worn clothes, a little girl clutching a ratty teddy bear economy-class passengers who would spend the flight in the back of the plane while she enjoyed first class. She dismissed them without a second thought and kept walking. Nathan noticed her the way you notice someone beautiful and confident moving through the world like they own it, but his attention quickly returned to Emma, who was watching the planes through the terminal windows with undimmed excitement. Inside the cabin, the contrast between classes was stark. First class was all wide seats and champagne glasses and flight attendants who remembered your name. Economy was cramped rows and shared armrests and the perpetual negotiation for overhead bin space. Nathan helped Emma into seat 8B, the one by the window, and she looked up at him with surprise. "But you said we did not get window seats." He smiled the kind of smile that transformed his tired face into something warm and gentle. "Changed my mind. You should see the clouds, sweetheart." Emma pressed her face to the glass, immediately watching the ground crew load luggage and signal to pilots the entire mysterious world of airports that seemed magical when you were 7 years old. Nathan settled into 8A, the aisle seat, and fastened his seatbelt with the automatic efficiency of someone who had spent thousands of hours in aircraft of one kind or another. The flight attendant walked past a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Grace Harper. She stopped briefly at their row, taking in the father and daughter with the quick assessment of someone trained to read passengers. "Can I get you anything?" Nathan shook his head. "We are fine, thank you." Grace noticed something about him as she moved on down the aisle. The way he spoke was polite, quiet, tired, but warm. He had the kind of stillness that suggested discipline, the controlled energy of someone who had been trained to remain calm under pressure. She filed the observation away without knowing why, and continued her pre-flight duties. The plane pulled away from the gate, taxied through the maze of runways, and finally turned toward the strip of concrete that would launch them into the sky. Emma's small hand found Nathan's and squeezed tight, her excitement mixing with nervous energy. The engines roared, pressing them back into their seats, and the plane accelerated down the runway with gathering speed. Emma's grip tightened. "I'm a little scared, Dad." Nathan squeezed back, his voice soft and sure. "Me too, sweetheart. But I am here. I am always here." The wheels left the ground, the nose lifted toward the clouds, and Chicago fell away below them, becoming first a grid of streets and lights, and then a glow on the horizon, and then nothing but darkness and stars. Emma's breathing slowed as the initial excitement faded into the drowsy warmth of a cabin pressurized for sleep. Within minutes, she was unconscious against his shoulder, Mr. Buttons tucked under her chin, her small body trusting completely in her father's ability to keep her safe. Nathan looked down at her, and for a moment he was somewhere else entirely. A hospital room 3 years ago. Catherine lying in the bed, her hand in his, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear the words. She had been beautiful once before the cancer had stolen her hair and her strength and everything except her spirit. And even then, even at the end, she had been the most beautiful thing Nathan had ever seen. "Promise me," she had whispered, her eyes finding his through the fog of pain medication and approaching death. "Promise me you will take care of her. I promise. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will always come home to her. I will, Catherine. I swear." She had smiled then, that smile he fell in love with 15 years ago, and her grip on his hand had tightened with surprising strength. "And promise me something else, Nathan. Promise me you will not close yourself off. Promise me you will find happiness again. She needs you happy, not just present." He had promised because you promise dying people anything they ask, and because he loved her too much to deny her final wishes, even when he knew he could never keep them. Catherine had died that night, slipping away while he held her hand, and Nathan Cole had kept one promise and broken the other for 3 years. Before the cancer, before the hospital rooms, and the chemotherapy, and the long nights watching her fade away, Nathan had been someone else entirely. Captain Nathan Cole, United States Air Force call sign, Ghost, because he could appear and disappear from radar like a phantom. His squadron had called him the best stick-and-rudder pilot they had ever seen, the kind of natural talent that comes along once in a generation. He had flown F-16s in conditions that would make most pilots freeze, had landed crippled aircraft in the dark, with systems failing and alarms screaming, had earned medals and commendations, and the respect of men who did not give respect easily. His commanding officer had called him irreplaceable. The day Catherine was diagnosed, Nathan had walked into that same officer's office and requested discharge. "You are throwing away a career, Cole. You are the best we have got. We need pilots like you." Nathan had looked him in the eye, and his voice had been steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "My wife is dying, sir. My daughter needs me. The sky can wait." The sky had waited. Catherine had not. He walked away from everything that day, from the medals and the missions, and the identity he had built over a decade of service. He became a software engineer, because it was steady work that paid well and let him be home, and he became a full-time father because Emma needed him, and because he had promised. For 3 years, Nathan Cole had been just another single dad, in a worn hoodie doing his best to raise a little girl who looked more like her mother every day. He had not touched a flight stick, had not felt the thunder of jet engines beneath him, had not been ghost to anyone. That life felt like it belonged to someone else, a man he used to know, a man who died in a hospital room holding his wife's hand. He had kept the first promise, the one about always coming home to Emma. The second promise, the one about finding happiness again, felt impossible. How do you open your heart when the last time you did it was shattered into pieces so small you still found them years later in unexpected moments? Nathan closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engines lull him toward sleep. His daughter was safe against his shoulder, her breath soft and even, and whatever else happened in the world, that was enough. He did not know that in a few hours his past would come crashing back into his present. He did not know that the skills he had walked away from, the instincts he had buried, the pilot he used to be, would be the only thing standing between 283 people and the cold Atlantic Ocean below. He just slept a tired father in economy class, dreaming of nothing. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into the particular stillness of overnight travel. The lights were dimmed to a soft blue that was supposed to promote sleep, and it seemed to be working. Most passengers had surrendered to the drone of the engines, wrapped in thin airline blankets with neck pillows bent at uncomfortable angles. The flight attendants moved through the aisles occasionally, stepping over outstretched feet and checking on passengers with the quiet efficiency of people who had made this journey hundreds of times. Everything was routine, normal, exactly as it should be. Nathan had dozed off with Emma still curled against his shoulder, his body finding rest, even while some part of his mind remained alert the way it always did, a leftover from years of training that never quite went away. His breathing was slow, and even his face relaxed in sleep, and anyone looking at him would see nothing but an exhausted father, catching whatever rest he could. In first class, the atmosphere was considerably more luxurious, but no less tense for one particular passenger. Olivia Bennett had given up on sleep an hour ago, her mind too wired with thoughts of tomorrow's presentation to surrender to unconsciousness. Her laptop was open in front of her. slides filling the screen with graphs and projections and carefully crafted talking points. The London account was worth $50 million. If she closed this deal, it would not just be a professional triumph, it would be proof. Proof that she had made the right choices, that the sacrifices had been worth it, that walking away from a failed marriage and throwing herself into work had been strength rather than escape. She reached for her wine glass, took a sip, and tried to focus on the presentation for the 100th time. The divorce had been 2 years ago, the kind of quiet dissolution that happened when two people realized they had been growing in different directions for so long they could no longer see each other. Her husband, ex-husband, now had left for a younger woman with fewer responsibilities and more availability, and Olivia had been left with Sophie and a career and the burning need to prove that she did not need anyone. Sophie was 8 years old now, smart and artistic, and painfully shy, the kind of child who observed the world from behind her mother's legs before cautiously venturing out to explore. She was with the nanny tonight, probably asleep by now, in her room full of drawings and books, and Olivia felt the familiar twist of guilt that came with being a working single mother. She should be there. She should be the one making sure Sophie had breakfast tomorrow, helping her pick out clothes for school. Being present in all the ways that magazines and parenting books insisted were crucial for healthy development. Instead, she was on a plane to London, chasing a deal that would prove she was successful, prove she had not failed, prove that all of this had been worth it. Olivia looked up from her laptop, her eyes drifting toward the economy section visible through the gap in the curtains. She could see the man from earlier, the one in the worn hoodie asleep with his daughter tucked against his side. They looked peaceful content, the kind of simple happiness that Olivia told herself she did not need. She felt something then, a brief pang, that might have been jealousy, or longing, or recognition of something she had lost without realizing it, but she pushed it away. That was not success. That was settling. She had bigger things to worry about. She returned to her presentation. In the cockpit, Captain David Reynolds adjusted his headset and checked the instrument panel with the practiced ease of 30 years in the air. He was 56 years old, silver-haired and steady, the kind of pilot who made passengers feel safe simply by the sound of his voice over the intercom. "Smooth sailing tonight," he commented to his co-pilot, First Officer Ryan Mitchell. "Should be an easy run into Heathrow." Mitchell nodded, grateful for the calm. He was 28, baby-faced, despite his best efforts to look older, with only 800 hours of flight time to his name. This was his first transatlantic flight, without a more experienced first officer backing him up, and he was trying very hard not to show how nervous that made him. "Weather looks clear all the way in," Mitchell reported, checking the screens in front of him. "Tailwind should get us there a bit early." Reynolds smiled. "Good. I'm supposed to have dinner with my wife tomorrow night. Anniversary. 40 years. 40 years. That is incredible, sir. She is an incredible woman." Reynolds reached for his coffee cup, taking a sip of the lukewarm liquid. 2 more years, and I retire. Planning to buy a boat sail around the Caribbean. Let someone else deal with flight schedules and airline politics. It was the kind of easy banter that made long flights bearable. The casual conversation of colleagues who had logged enough hours together to be comfortable with silence, but chose words instead. Back in the cabin, Grace Harper walked the aisles one more time, checking on sleeping passengers and collecting empty cups. She paused at row 8, looking down at Nathan and Emma with a small smile. There was something about them that tugged at her, the tenderness of the father's protective posture, the trust evident in how the little girl slept against him. Grace had been a flight attendant for 8 years. She had seen every kind of passenger, from demanding executives to nervous first-time flyers to families trying to manage children across 12 hours of confinement. She had developed an instinct for reading people, for knowing who might cause trouble and who might need extra attention. The man in 8A was different. There was a stillness to him that suggested depth, the kind of calm that came from having faced harder things than turbulence and delayed flights. She wondered briefly what his story was, then moved on. Everyone had a story. It was not her job to know them all. Everything was calm. Everything was normal. Everything was about to change. The first warning came without warning. One moment, the plane was cruising smoothly through the dark sky engines humming their steady lullaby. The next moment it dropped. Not the gentle dip of minor turbulence, the kind that makes you grip your armrest for a second before returning to your book. This was violent, sudden, a sickening plunge that sent everything not secured flying through the cabin. A woman in row 15 screamed. Someone's laptop crashed against the ceiling. Overhead, bins rattled and shook, some of them popping open to spill their contents into the aisle. The seatbelt sign blinked on with a harsh, insistent chime, but the warning came too late for those who had unbuckled to use the restroom or stretch their legs. A man stumbled and fell, cracking his elbow against an armrest. A flight attendant near the galley was thrown against the wall, barely catching herself on the counter. And in the cockpit, everything went to hell. Captain Reynolds reached for his coffee as the plane pitched forward without warning. The cup flew from his hand, but that was the least of his problems. The sudden motion threw him against the control panel with brutal force, his head striking the edge of the instrument console with a sound that would haunt Ryan Mitchell for years to come. A wet, sickening crack. Blood began to flow immediately, running down Reynolds's temple in a dark ribbon, and the captain slumped sideways in his seat, eyes closed, body limp. Unconscious or worse, Mitchell could not tell, and did not have time to check, because the plane was falling. Mitchell grabbed the yoke with both hands, fighting against controls that suddenly felt like they were moving through wet concrete. The aircraft was pitching forward, dropping altitude at a rate that would kill them all if he could not level it out. Captain Reynolds. No response. Just the blood pooling on the armrest, the slack weight of the older man against his harness. Mitchell pulled back on the yoke with everything he had straining against resistance that should not have been there. Commercial aircraft were designed to be manageable with hydraulic systems that made the massive control surfaces feel light and responsive. But something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The control panel in front of him lit up like a Christmas tree, but all the wrong colors. Red lights flashing in sequence warnings competing for attention, each one more urgent than the last. Primary flight control system failure. Hydraulic pressure loss. Autopilot disengaged. Mitchell's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the alarms. He had 800 hours of flight time, most of it in good conditions with functioning equipment and experienced captains beside him. He had never flown without autopilot assistance. He had never dealt with hydraulic failure. He had never been the only conscious pilot in the cockpit of a plane, carrying 283 souls through the night sky. He pulled back harder on the yoke arms, shaking from the effort. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose began to rise. The rate of descent decreased. The plane leveled out. But barely. Mitchell's arms were already burning from the strain. The yoke wanted to push forward, wanted to send them into a dive, and only his constant backward pressure was keeping them level. He could not maintain this for long. He could not maintain this for the 6 hours it would take to reach London. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His breathing was ragged, and Captain Reynolds was still unconscious, still bleeding, still unable to help. In the cabin, passengers were waking to nightmare. The violent motion had jarred even the deepest sleepers into terrified consciousness, and the screaming had not stopped. People clutched armrests, clutched each other, clutched anything solid as the plane shuddered and groaned around them. Grace Harper moved through the chaos with a calm. She did not feel her voice steady and reassuring, even as her hands trembled. Please remain in your seats. Keep your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue because she had seen the flight deck door open briefly, had glimpsed the flashing red lights and the unconscious captain, and she knew that nothing was under control. Nathan woke the instant the plane dropped his military training, snapping him into alertness before his conscious mind had fully processed what was happening. He assessed the situation in seconds, the way he had been taught, cataloging information and drawing conclusions with the automatic efficiency of someone who had trained for emergencies. Violent turbulence, but no oxygen masks deployed. That meant cabin pressure was intact. The plane was struggling to maintain altitude, the engines working harder than they should be for level flight. The flight attendants were scared professionally hiding it, but scared nonetheless. Something was wrong with the aircraft. Something serious. Emma was awake beside him, her face pale with fear, her hands clutching Mr. Button so tightly, the bear's remaining eye looked like it might pop off entirely. "Dad, what is happening?" Nathan's voice was calm, steady, the voice he had used in the cockpit when alarms were screaming and missiles were tracking, and panic was a luxury he could not afford. "Just some bumpy air, sweetheart. I need you to stay in your seat, okay? Keep your seatbelt tight, and hold on to Mr. Buttons. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded, trusting him completely the way children trust their parents to make everything okay. Nathan looked up, scanning the cabin, reading the fear on passengers' faces and the controlled panic of the flight attendants. He watched Grace Harper moving through the aisle, saw the way her eyes kept darting toward the cockpit, and he knew. Whatever was happening up there, it was bad. In first class, Olivia Bennett was experiencing a different kind of terror. Her laptop had gone flying during the initial drop, and she did not care. Her wine glass had shattered red liquid staining her designer dress, and she did not care about that either. All she could think about was Sophie. 8 years old, probably asleep right now, no idea that her mother might never come home. All the presentations and promotions and professional achievements, all the proof she had been so desperate to accumulate, none of it mattered. None of it would matter if she died tonight over the Atlantic Ocean, leaving her daughter an orphan. She should have stayed home. She should have been there for breakfast tomorrow, for school drop-off, for all the ordinary moments she had traded for this career, this deal, this flight that might be her last. Tears streamed down her face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. She just gripped the armrest and prayed to a God she had not thought about in years, making promises she meant with every fiber of her being. "Please let me see my daughter again. Please let me go home." She looked around the cabin wildly, searching for someone who could help someone who looked like they knew what to do. Her eyes landed on the man in row 8, the one in the hoodie, and she felt a shock of surprise. He was the only person on the plane who looked calm. Not the forced calm of someone pretending to be brave, real calm, the kind that came from training, from experience, from having faced worse than this and survived. He was watching the flight attendants, watching the cockpit door, his jaw tight with what might have been concentration or decision. Who was he? Grace Harper knew she needed help. She had been a flight attendant long enough to know when a situation was beyond her training, and this was far beyond. Captain Reynolds was unconscious. First Officer Mitchell was alone in the cockpit, fighting to control an aircraft that did not want to be controlled. And she had 283 passengers who were looking to her for reassurance she could not provide. She reached for the intercom, her voice steady through force of will alone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if anyone on board has flight experience, please identify yourself to the crew immediately." It was a long shot, she knew. Commercial flights were not like the movies where conveniently qualified heroes always happened to be on board. But she had to try. A hand went up near the front of the economy cabin. An older man, silver-haired and dignified, rising from his seat with the careful movements of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. "I have flight experience," he said. "Howard Brennan. 200 hours private pilot license. I can try to help." Grace felt a surge of hope. "Please come with me, sir." She led Howard to the cockpit, her heart pounding with desperate optimism. 200 hours was not much, but it was something. It was more than she had. But when the cockpit door opened, when Howard Brennan saw what was waiting for him, the hope on his face collapsed into something else entirely. The control panel was a constellation of red warning lights. Captain Reynolds was slumped in his seat, blood still seeping from his head wound, unconscious and unreachable. First Officer Mitchell was wrestling with the yoke, his young face pale and sweating, his arms shaking from sustained effort, and beyond the windshield nothing but darkness. endless empty darkness over an ocean that would swallow them whole if they went down. Howard Brennan had flown Cessnas, small single-engine aircraft that you could land in a field if you had to, that responded to controls with the lightness of a sports car. This was a Boeing 777. This was an entirely different animal, a massive, complex machine with systems he had never trained on and controls he had never touched. He sat down in the captain's seat anyway because someone had to try. "I have got it," he said, gripping the yoke. "Tell me what is happening." Mitchell's voice was tight with fear and exhaustion. "Hydraulic failure. Primary flight computer is dead. I have been holding it manually for almost 10 minutes. I cannot my arms." Howard pulled back on the yoke and understood immediately what Mitchell meant. The resistance was enormous, like trying to steer a truck with no power steering while driving through mud. His arms began to burn within seconds. I have never. Howard was sweating through his shirt already, his breath coming fast and shallow. "I have only flown small aircraft. I do not know these systems. I do not know." 5 minutes passed. Howard's arms were trembling uncontrollably. The yoke kept wanting to push forward to send them into a dive, and only constant backward pressure was keeping them level. His face had gone from pale to gray. "I cannot do this," he finally admitted, his voice breaking. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I cannot." He released the yoke, and Mitchell grabbed it again, groaning with the effort of resuming the burden. Howard stumbled back from the seat, shame and helplessness written across his face. Grace Harper watched this unfold with growing horror. Their one hope, their only qualified passenger, and he could not do it. The plane was going to crash, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Mitchell keyed the intercom again. His voice was different this time. Not the professional tone they trained you to use. This was raw, afraid the voice of a young man who knew he was probably going to die. "This is the flight deck. We have an emergency situation. We need someone with military flight experience. If anyone on board has flown combat aircraft, please identify yourself to the crew immediately. This is urgent. Please. We need help." The cabin went silent. The screaming stopped, the crying quieted, and 283 people looked at each other with the terrible understanding that this announcement meant things were worse than they had feared. Much worse. In first class, Olivia Bennett's mind raced. Military flight experience, combat aircraft. Surely someone on this plane, someone important, someone who looked like they knew what they were doing. Her eyes swept the business class section, the executives and lawyers, and wealthy travelers who surrounded her. None of them moved. She turned to look toward economy, and her eyes found the man in row 8 again. He was sitting very still, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. He looked like he was fighting some internal battle, struggling with a decision that was tearing him apart. Not him, she thought. What could he possibly know about flying combat aircraft? He is just some economy passenger in a worn hoodie. She turned away, praying that someone qualified would step forward, someone who looked the part, someone who could save them. Nathan heard the announcement, and every word hit him like a physical blow. Military flight experience, combat aircraft. The words reached into the past and dragged out everything he had buried, everything he had walked away from, everything he had tried to forget. His hands remembered. Even now, even after 3 years of software engineering and school pickups and ordinary civilian life, his hands remembered the feel of an F-16's controls, the responsiveness, the power, the intimate connection between pilot and aircraft. He had been good, not just good, the best. Call sign Ghost. 2,000 combat hours. Night landings emergency procedures, crippled aircraft brought home against all odds. His squadron had trusted him with their lives, and he had never let them down. But that was before Catherine got sick, before the hospital rooms and the chemo and the long, terrible nights watching her fade away, before he promised her he would always come home to Emma, that he would never put himself in danger again. He looked down at his daughter. Emma was watching him with those big, trusting eyes, her face pale with fear, but calm because she believed in him. believed that her daddy would keep her safe the way he always did. If he went to that cockpit, he was putting himself at risk. If something went wrong, if he could not save the plane, Emma would lose her only remaining parent. She would be orphaned at 7 years old, left alone in a world that had already taken her mother. He had promised Catherine. But if he did not go, if he sat here and did nothing, they were all going to die anyway. Emma and the 282 other souls on this plane and everyone waiting for them on the ground. His military training whispered in his ear the lessons that had been drilled into him until they were part of his DNA. You do not abandon your unit. You do not leave people to die when you have the power to help them. The mission comes first, always. His father's heart screamed back, Emma, Emma, Emma. Have you ever had to choose between staying safe and doing what was right? What would you do in Nathan's position? Tell us in the comments. Emma was looking at him. Her small hand reached out and touched his arm. Dad. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. Can you help them? And Nathan realized in that moment that Emma knew. Somehow, despite all the years of silence, despite all the things he had never told her about who he used to be, she knew. She had heard the announcement, had seen his reaction, had understood that her father might be able to do something. Sweetheart. Mom always said you were a hero, Emma whispered. She said you gave it up for us. But maybe right now you need to be a hero again. Nathan's throat closed up. Catherine. Catherine had told their daughter about his past, had kept that memory alive even as she was dying, had made sure Emma knew what her father was capable of, the promise he had made, the promise to always come home to Emma. He could not keep that promise if he stayed in his seat and let them all die. Nathan leaned forward and kissed Emma's forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her small body against his. I need you to stay in your seat, sweetheart. No matter what happens, stay here. I am going to help them, and then I am going to come back to you. I promise. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with tears, but her chin lifted with determination. I know you will, Daddy. I believe in you. Nathan unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. The movement drew attention from surrounding passengers, people looking up at this ordinary man in his worn hoodie with confusion and desperate hope. He turned to Grace Harper, who was standing in the aisle with her professional mask cracking around the edges. Watch her for me, Nathan said quietly, nodding toward Emma. Please. Grace looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. Authority. Certainty. The calm, focused intensity of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. You have experience. Yes. Former Air Force F-16 pilot. The words felt strange on his tongue after so long, like speaking a language he had almost forgotten. I can help. Grace stepped aside immediately, hope flooding her face. This way. Nathan walked toward the cockpit, his stride steady, his shoulders squared. He did not look at the passengers watching him pass, did not acknowledge the whispers of who is he, and is he a pilot that followed in his wake. In first class, Olivia Bennett watched the man in the hoodie walk past her row, and her mouth fell open. Him. The economy passenger. The nobody she had dismissed without a second thought. He moved like a different person now. The tired father was gone, replaced by someone who walked with purpose and authority, someone whose very presence seemed to promise that everything would be okay. She did not understand. She could not reconcile what she was seeing with what she had assumed, with the judgments she had made, based on his clothes and his seat, and his lack of obvious importance. But as he disappeared through the cockpit door, Olivia Bennett felt something she had not expected. Hope. The cockpit door opened, and Nathan stepped into a nightmare. The first thing he saw was Captain Reynolds, slumped in the left seat with blood running down his temple and pooling on his shoulder. Unconscious at best. The older pilot's face was slack, his breathing shallow, and Nathan's trained eye assessed immediately that he would not be waking up anytime soon. The second thing he saw was the control panel. Warning lights blinked in angry red sequences, illuminating a cascade of failures that would have made most pilots freeze. Hydraulic pressure warnings, engine temperature alerts, electrical system irregularities, autopilot disengaged, primary flight computer offline. It was bad. It was very, very bad. First Officer Mitchell looked up at him with the desperate eyes of a drowning man seeing a life raft. He was young, too young for this, his face pale and slicked with sweat, his arms shaking from the sustained effort of fighting the yoke. "Please tell me you know what you are doing," Mitchell gasped. "Please." Nathan's mind was already shifting, the civilian father retreating as the combat pilot emerged from wherever he had been hiding for 3 years. He took in the situation with the rapid assessment skills that had been drilled into him through countless hours of training and real-world emergencies. Former Air Force Nathan set his voice calm and authoritative in a way it had not been in years. F-16 pilot. Over 2,000 combat hours. "I've got experience with emergency procedures and manual flight control." Mitchell's relief was so profound, it was almost painful to witness. "Thank God, thank God." "Status report," Nathan commanded, already moving toward the captain's seat. "Tell me everything." Mitchell rattled off the information, while Nathan carefully moved Captain Reynolds aside, checking his pulse and breathing. The older pilot was alive, but deeply unconscious. He would need medical attention when they landed, if they landed. Hydraulic pressure is at 40% and dropping slowly. Engine 2 is running hot temperature, climbing past the yellow zone. Electrical systems are intermittent. Primary flight computer is completely dead. I have been flying manually for almost 15 minutes. The yoke, God, the yoke is so heavy. Nathan slid into the captain's seat and wrapped his hands around the yoke. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. His hands just rested there, feeling the vibration of the aircraft through the controls, the familiar weight and texture of a yoke he had not touched in 3 years. Then his body remembered. It was like riding a bicycle, people always said. But it was more than that. It was like breathing. The controls were different, larger, and heavier than an F-16 stick, but the principles were the same. Feel the aircraft. Sense what it wants to do. Make small corrections, constant adjustments, the intimate dance between pilot and machine. 3 years fell away. He was ghost again. Nathan pulled back slightly on the yoke, adjusting the trim with his other hand, making micro-corrections that immediately smoothed out the aircraft's flight path. The plane had been wobbling under Mitchell's control, the young pilot fighting against the resistance, without understanding how to work with it. Nathan did not fight. He guided. Mitchell stared at him with something like awe. "How did you? The plane just... It feels different." "I reduced our angle of attack slightly," Nathan explained, his voice calm and instructive even in crisis. "We were putting too much load on the remaining hydraulics. Now! We need to find somewhere to land. London is out of the question. How far have we come?" Mitchell checked the navigation display with hands that were still shaking, but steadier now. About 3 hours into the flight. We are over the Atlantic, roughly 1,000 miles from Ireland. Nathan's mind was calculating, drawing on knowledge he had not accessed in years, but which was still there, still sharp. The Boeing 777 had a range of over 7,000 miles. They had fuel. What they did not have was functioning systems. Shannon Airport, Nathan decided. Ireland. Emergency landing. What is the runway length? Mitchell pulled up the information. 3,199 meters. Nathan did the math in his head. It was going to be close. With degraded hydraulics and no primary flight computer, their stopping distance would be significantly longer than normal. They might not have enough runway. But they did not have another option. "Radio Shannon," Nathan ordered. "Declare emergency. Tell them we need crash and rescue on standby, full emergency response." Mitchell reached for the radio with renewed purpose, his voice steady as he made the call. Nathan kept his hands on the yoke, feeling the aircraft making constant small adjustments to keep them level and on course. The plane wanted to dive. The hydraulic failure meant the control surfaces were not responding properly, and gravity was pulling the nose down with relentless patience. Without constant backward pressure on the yoke, they would enter a descent that they might not be able to pull out of. Nathan's arms would be screaming by the time they reached Shannon. He did not care. He had carried heavier burdens than this. "Shannon is responding," Mitchell reported. They are clearing the runway, mobilizing emergency services. ETA is approximately 45 minutes at current speed. Good. Now let us talk about what we're going to do when we get there. For the next 15 minutes, Nathan walked Mitchell through the landing procedure they would use. Without full hydraulics, everything would be manual. The flaps would deploy, but slowly, and possibly incompletely. The brakes would be weak mechanical, only instead of hydraulically assisted. They would have one shot at this one chance to put the plane on the ground and stop before they ran out of runway. Mitchell listened, asked questions, took notes on a clipboard, with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. Having someone in command, someone who knew what they were doing, had transformed the young pilot from a panicking kid into a competent co-pilot. "You're doing well," Nathan told him during a brief pause. "You kept this plane in the air for 15 minutes with minimal training. That took courage." Mitchell's eyes glistened. "I thought we were going to die. We are not going to die," Nathan said firmly. "We are going to land this plane, and everyone on board is going to walk off under their own power. That is the only acceptable outcome." It was not a guarantee. It was barely even a reasonable expectation given the circumstances. But Mitchell needed to believe it, and so did Nathan. He keyed the intercom, and his voice went out over the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your new captain speaking." The words felt strange, the rank he had not claimed in years. "My name is Nathan Cole. I am a former Air Force pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight experience. I have taken control of the aircraft." He paused, letting that sink in, letting the passengers process that someone was in charge, someone who knew what they were doing. "We have experienced a technical malfunction that requires us to divert to Shannon Airport in Ireland. I am not going to lie to you, this is going to be a challenging landing, but I have landed aircraft in worse condition than this, and I have every intention of getting all 283 of us safely on the ground." Another pause. His voice softened slightly. "I have a 7-year-old daughter on this plane. She is in Seat 8B, holding a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons, and she is the reason I'm going to do everything in my power to bring us home. I made a promise to her mother that I would always come back, and I do not break my promises." In the cabin, passengers listened to this voice, this calm, confident, unexpectedly personal voice, and something shifted in the atmosphere. The panic receded. The crying quieted. People sat up straighter, held hands with neighbors they did not know, and found a reservoir of hope they had not expected. In row 8, Emma heard her father's voice and smiled through her tears. Mr. Buttons was pressed against her chest, and she was not afraid anymore. Daddy was flying the plane. Everything would be okay. In first class, Olivia Bennett listened to the announcement with a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly. Hope, definitely. But also something else, something that felt almost like shame. She had looked at that man, Nathan Cole, and seen nothing. A tired father in a worn hoodie, an economy passenger, a nobody. And now that nobody was going to save all their lives. The next 45 minutes were the longest of Nathan's life. He flew the crippled aircraft with a precision that came from somewhere deeper than memory, his hands making constant adjustments, his eyes scanning instruments and horizon with equal attention. The yoke was heavy in his hands, the hydraulic failure making every movement a physical effort, but he did not waver. Mitchell worked beside him, calling out altitude and airspeed, managing what systems still functioned, proving himself a capable co-pilot. Now that he had someone to follow, the fear had not left his eyes, but it was controlled, now channeled into focus and determination. Hydraulic pressure dropping, Mitchell reported at one point, down to 30%. Noted. We will compensate. Nathan made another small adjustment, feeling the aircraft respond sluggishly, but obediently. Engine 2 temperature is critical. We are redlining. We need that engine for another 30 minutes. Keep monitoring. If it looks like it is going to fail, we shut it down early and adjust our approach. The dark Atlantic passed beneath them, invisible but ever-present, a cold grave waiting if they made a mistake. Nathan did not think about it. He thought about Emma's face, about the promise he had made, about the 282 other people on this plane who were trusting him with their lives. Shannon appeared on the radar, a glowing dot on the screen that represented salvation or disaster, depending on the next few minutes. Nathan began his descent, gentle, controlled, working with the damaged aircraft instead of fighting against it. 15 miles out, Mitchell called. Beginning approach. Tell the cabin to prepare for emergency landing. Grace Harper's voice came over the intercom moments later, calm and clear despite everything. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into Shannon Airport. Please return your seats to the upright position. Stow all loose items and assume the brace position when instructed. Place your heads down and your hands behind your head. The crew will give you the signal. In the cabin, passengers followed instructions with the particular obedience of people who understood this might be their last few minutes alive. Some prayed, some cried, some simply closed their eyes and thought of the people they loved. Olivia Bennett pressed her face toward the window, but there was nothing to see. Just darkness and the faint reflection of her own terrified face. She thought about Sophie, about the breakfast she would make her tomorrow if she survived this, about all the mornings she would never take for granted again. Bradley Thornton reached out and took the hand of a young boy sitting alone beside him, a teenager who had been traveling to meet his father in London. "It is going to be okay," son Thornton said, and for once in his life he meant it, not as manipulation or social nicety, but as genuine human comfort. Emma sat with her eyes closed, lips moving in silent conversation. She was talking to her mother, she would tell Nathan later, asking for help, asking Mom to help Daddy land the plane. The runway appeared ahead, a strip of lights in the darkness that looked impossibly short from this altitude and approach angle. Nathan had landed on carriers with less room, but not in a passenger jet, not with failing systems, not with 283 lives depending on every decision he made. 1 minute out, Mitchell called. Altitude 1,000 feet. Cut engine 2 to 50%. Thrust, Nathan ordered. We're coming in too hot. Mitchell made the adjustment. The plane slowed, but not enough. 30 seconds. Altitude 500 feet. Speed 200 knots. Too fast. They were still too fast. Nathan's voice cut through the tension. Cut engine 1 now. Mitchell hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then hit the button. The left engine shut down, and the plane tilted slightly as the asymmetric thrust tried to yaw them off course. Nathan fought the yoke using rudder and aileron to keep them straight. Speed dropped. 180, 170, 15 seconds. Altitude 200 feet. The runway was clearly visible now, rushing toward them with terrifying speed. Nathan could see the emergency vehicles lined up along the edge's lights, flashing ready for whatever happened next. 10 seconds. Altitude 100 feet. Brace positions, Grace Harper's voice over the intercom. Heads down. Brace for impact. In the cabin, passengers bent forward, hands over their heads, prayers on their lips. 5 seconds, 50 feet. Nathan pulled back on the yoke, entering the flare, the final maneuver that would settle them onto the runway. The controls resisted the degraded hydraulics, fighting him, and he pulled harder. 20 feet. 10. The rear wheels hit the runway with a bang that echoed through the entire aircraft. Smoke exploded from the tires as rubber met concrete at 160 miles per hour. The plane bounced, lifted for a heart-stopping moment, then slammed down again. The front wheels struck with equal violence, and the entire fuselage shuddered like a living thing in pain. Nathan stomped on the brakes, but without full hydraulics they were weak, barely slowing them down. The end of the runway was rushing toward them, and beyond it the dark waters of the Shannon estuary. "Reverse thrust on engine 2, Nathan shouted. Maximum Mitchell pulled the lever. The remaining engine roared in protest, its thrust reversing, pushing back against their momentum. The plane shuddered. The tires screamed against the concrete. The left tires exploded, shredded by the stress, and the aircraft listed to one side. Nathan fought the yoke with everything he had, using the rudder to keep them straight, refusing to let the plane veer off into disaster. Speed dropping, 100 knots, 80, 60. The end of the runway was still coming, still too close. 40 knots, 20, 300 meters, 200, 100. 10 knots. 50 meters from the edge of the runway, 50 meters from the dark water beyond, the plane stopped. For 3 seconds that felt like eternity, no one moved. The engines spooled down their roar, fading to a whine and then to silence. The only sound was the hiss of emergency systems and the distant wail of approaching fire trucks. Then the cabin erupted. Screaming, crying, laughing, all mixed together in a release of tension so profound it was almost violent. Passengers hugged strangers, sobbed into each other's shoulders, shouted hallelujahs and thank gods and words in a dozen languages that all meant the same thing. We are alive. We are alive. We are alive. Bradley Thornton stood up from his seat and began clapping, slow at first, then building in intensity. Others joined him. The applause spread through the cabin like a wave, building and building until it was thunderous, until it shook the walls and drowned out everything else. In the cockpit, Nathan released the yoke. His hands were shaking so badly he could not have gripped it again if he wanted to. His arms ached from an hour of fighting the controls, muscles trembling with exhaustion. But they had made it. They were on the ground. They were alive. Mitchell was staring at him with tears streaming down his face. "We are alive," he said, his voice breaking. "Oh God, we are alive. You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Nathan corrected quietly. "I could not have done it without you." But he did not have time for celebration or acknowledgement. There was only one thing on his mind, one person he needed to see. Nathan unbuckled his harness and stood on legs that threatened to give out beneath him. He steadied himself against the seat, took a breath, and stepped toward the cabin door. When he emerged from the cockpit, every face turned toward him. 283 passengers, crew members, all of them looking at this man in the worn hoodie who had just saved their lives. But Nathan was not looking at them. He was looking at row 8, seat B, where a 7-year-old girl with blonde hair was already climbing over the passenger in the aisle seat, her teddy bear clutched in one hand and no hand. Daddy Emma ran down the aisle, and Nathan dropped to his knees just in time to catch her. She crashed into him with all the force her small body could generate, and his arms wrapped around her so tightly he was afraid he might hurt her, but he could not let go. "I am here, baby," he whispered into her hair. "I am here. I promised I would come back. I always keep my promises." Emma was sobbing against his chest, her whole body shaking with relief and residual fear and overwhelming love. "I knew you could do it, Daddy. I told Mom you could do it, and she helped. She helped you land the plane." Nathan's tears were falling now, too, dropping into Emma's hair, and he did not care who saw. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think she did." They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter holding each other in the aisle of a plane that had almost become their grave. The other passengers watched with tears in their own eyes, moved by this display of love that reminded them why they had been so desperate to survive. In first class, Olivia Bennett stood frozen in the aisle, watching the reunion through a blur of tears. The man in the hoodie, the economy passenger, the nobody she had dismissed without a second thought. He was on his knees holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the universe, crying openly in front of 283 strangers, and he was the most heroic person Olivia had ever seen. She had spent her entire adult life chasing success, measuring worth in job titles and bank accounts and designer clothes. She had judged people by their seats on airplanes and the brands of their luggage and the neighborhoods they lived in. And she had been wrong, so completely, utterly wrong. Nathan Cole had nothing that Olivia would have considered impressive. He flew economy. He wore worn clothes. He was a single father working an ordinary job, living an ordinary life. But when it mattered, when lives were on the line, he had stepped up. He had saved them all. Something cracked inside Olivia, some wall she had built without realizing it, some armor she had worn so long she had forgotten it was there. She did not approach Nathan and Emma. This was their moment, and she had no right to intrude. But she knew with sudden certainty that she needed to see him again. Sometimes, the most extraordinary people look the most ordinary. Have you ever misjudged someone? Share your story in the comments below. The emergency slides deployed and passengers began evacuating the aircraft. Emergency responders swarmed the runway. Paramedics checking passengers for injuries, firefighters ensuring the plane was safe. Captain Reynolds was carried out on a stretcher, still unconscious, but stable. Nathan carried Emma off the plane himself, walking down the emergency slide with her in his arms, because he was not ready to let her go. They stood on the tarmac in the cool Irish night, surrounded by flashing lights and shouting emergency workers in the controlled chaos of a crisis averted. A paramedic approached Nathan asking if he needed medical attention. He shook his head. "I am fine, just tired." The paramedic looked at this exhausted man holding his daughter at the lines of strain on his face and the trembling in his hands and smiled gently. "You are a hero, sir. You saved everyone on that plane." Nathan looked down at Emma at her face pressed against his chest at the teddy bear still clutched in her hand. "I just kept a promise," he said quietly. "That is all." The small apartment in Chicago looked exactly as Nathan had left it. Same cracked tile in the kitchen that he kept meaning to fix. Same humming refrigerator that was probably older than Emma. Same second-hand furniture arranged with the practical efficiency of someone who had more important things to spend money on than aesthetics. 1 week had passed since the flight, and Nathan had spent most of it ignoring the outside world. His phone had rung 17 times with calls from news networks. CNN, BBC, Good Morning America. They all wanted the hero pilot, the man from C-Day who had saved 283 lives over the Atlantic. They wanted interviews and photo shoots and the chance to turn his face into a symbol of ordinary courage. Nathan had declined every single one. He did not want to be a symbol. He did not want cameras and microphones and the suffocating attention of people who saw a story instead of a person. He just wanted to be Emma's dad, to go back to the quiet life he had built to keep his promises without anyone watching. He was sitting at the kitchen table laptop, open reviewing code for a project that was due Monday. Ordinary work, ordinary life. The pilot who had saved a plane checking semicolons and debugging functions like nothing had happened. Emma sat beside him, crayons scattered across the table, working on a picture with the intense concentration of a child who took her art seriously. She had been quieter since the flight, more thoughtful, processing the experience in whatever way 7-year-olds process brushes with death. She held up her drawing for Nathan to see. It showed 2 people, a tall figure and a small one, standing in front of a large airplane. The tall figure had brown hair and a kind face. The small one was holding what was clearly meant to be Mr. Buttons. "That is us, Daddy. That is from when you landed the plane." Nathan smiled, the expression coming easier now than it had in years. "That is really beautiful, sweetheart. You are getting so good at drawing." Emma beamed and returned to her work, adding clouds to the sky above the airplane. The knock at the door came without warning. Nathan stood confused. He was not expecting anyone. His parents lived in Florida and only visited at Christmas. He did not have many friends, not the kind who dropped by unexpectedly, not anymore. When he opened the door, his breath caught. Grace Harper stood on the threshold, still wearing her flight attendant uniform, though it was clearly her day off. Behind her, spread across the hallway and down the stairs, were over 30 people. Faces Nathan recognized from the plane. The elderly woman he had helped with her luggage at the airport. The young mother who had been traveling with a baby. Passengers from every section of the aircraft, business class and economy, and everything in between. And at the back, half hidden behind the others, stood Olivia Bennett. She was not wearing the red dress anymore. Today it was simple jeans and a blue blouse, elegant but understated. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she looked nervous in a way that seemed at odds with the confident executive Nathan remembered from the airport. Beside her stood a young girl, maybe 8 years old, with shy eyes and dark hair that did not match her mother's blonde. The girl clutched her mother's hand and stared at Nathan with undisguised curiosity. "We wanted to see you," Grace said, her voice warm with emotion. "All of us. We needed to thank you properly." Nathan stepped back, overwhelmed. I do not understand." An older man pushed forward through the crowd. Nathan recognized him, Bradley Thornton, the businessman who had bumped into him at the airport without apology. But Thornton looked different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility. He was holding a large envelope and a framed object wrapped in cloth. Mr. Cole Thornton said, his voice thick with emotion he was clearly not accustomed to expressing. "On behalf of everyone on Flight 227, we wanted you to know what you did, what you gave us." He unwrapped the framed object and held it up. It was a Model F-16, beautifully detailed, mounted on a wooden base. The wings bore an engraving in elegant script, "Ghost Hero of Flight 227. Nathan's throat tightened. He could not speak. Thornton continued. "We took up a collection. Everyone contributed. Some gave more, some gave less, but everyone wanted to be part of this." He held out the envelope. "It is not enough. Nothing could ever be enough. But we wanted you to have it." Nathan took the envelope with numb fingers and looked inside. Checks and cash neatly organized. He counted quickly, then counted again, sure he had made a mistake. $180,000. "I cannot accept this," he said immediately. "This is too much. I did not do it for money. I did it because you have a daughter who needed her father to come home." Grace interrupted gently. "We know. We heard your announcement, and that is exactly why you should take it." An elderly woman stepped forward, the one Nathan had helped with her luggage at O'Hare. Her name, he would learn later, was Helen Novak. "I gave $2,000, she said, her voice steady despite her age. "That is my entire pension for the month, and I would give it again 10 times over, because you let me see my grandson again. He's 3 years old, and he has his whole life ahead of him because of you." Others spoke up one by one. "Because of you, I made it to my daughter's wedding. Because of you, I held my wife one more time. Because of you, my children still have a mother." Nathan's vision blurred with tears he did not try to hide. He looked at these people, strangers who had become something more through shared trauma and survival, and he felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. Bradley Thornton stepped closer, and his expression was genuinely contrite. "I owe you a personal apology, Mr. Cole. At the airport, I bumped into you without a word. I looked at you and saw nothing. Just another face in the crowd. I was wrong. I was so completely wrong." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I run a tech company, largest software firm in the Midwest. If you ever want a better position, better pay a chance to do something more with your skills. Call me. I will make it happen." Nathan looked at the card, then back at Thornton. "I appreciate that, sir. I really do. But I am happy where I am. I have a job that lets me be there for my daughter. That is worth more than any salary." Thornton smiled, and it was a different smile than Nathan had seen at the airport, warmer, more human. "I figured you would say that. But the offer stands. Forever." Then Olivia Bennett stepped forward, and Nathan's attention sharpened. She was even more beautiful without the designer dress and the armor of professional confidence. There was a vulnerability in her face that had not been there before, a softness that the crisis had somehow revealed. "Mr. Cole," she began, then stopped, clearly struggling with what she wanted to say. The little girl beside her tugged on her hand. "Mom, is this the man who saved the plane?" Olivia nodded, her eyes never leaving Nathan's face. "Yes, sweetheart. This is him." The girl, Sophie, let go of her mother's hand and walked right up to Nathan with the fearlessness of childhood. She was holding a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said shyly. "Mom told me what you did, and I wanted to say thank you for bringing her home." Nathan took the paper and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing remarkably similar to the one Emma had made. A man, a little girl, a plane. But at the bottom, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for bringing my mom home. From Sophie." Nathan's eyes burned. He looked up at Olivia, saw the tears streaming down her face, and understood. "She is beautiful," he said softly. "Your daughter." "She is everything," Olivia whispered, "and I almost—" Her voice broke. "On that plane, all I could think about was her. All my career achievements, all the success I thought mattered, none of it meant anything. I just wanted to come home to my little girl. She took a shaky breath. I judged you. At the airport on the plane, I looked at you, and I made assumptions based on your clothes, your seat, your appearance. I was wrong. I was so completely, utterly wrong. You are more decent than anyone I have ever met. Before Nathan could respond, Sophie had spotted Emma peering around her father's legs. Are you the pilot's daughter? Sophie asked. Emma nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of so many strangers. I am Sophie. I am 8. Do you want to be friends? And just like that, with the simplicity that only children possess, something began. 3 days later, Nathan was walking out of Emma's school when he saw her. Olivia Bennett stood near the gate, looking nothing like the powerful executive he remembered from the airport. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and she was fidgeting with her purse strap in a way that suggested she was nervous. Nathan stopped, surprised. Olivia, I hope this is not weird, she said quickly. I called the airline and they had your general location from the passenger records. I asked around, found out where Emma went to school. I am not a stalker, I promise. She trailed off, looking uncertain. You're just what I needed to thank you properly. Not in front of 30 other people. Just personally. Emma had spotted Sophie in the car parked nearby and was already running toward her, the two girls greeting each other with the enthusiasm of best friends who had been separated for an unbearable 3 days. Nathan watched them for a moment, then turned back to Olivia. Would you like to get coffee? There is a shop around the corner. Relief flooded her face. I would like that very much. They walked together, the girls following behind them in animated conversation about something involving unicorns and a video game Nathan had never heard of. It was strange. Nathan thought how natural this felt, like they had known each other longer than a week. The coffee shop was quiet at this hour, the mid-afternoon lull between lunch rush and evening crowds. They found a table by the window, while the girls claimed a booth nearby, already deeply engaged in whatever world they were building together. So Nathan said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup, "You came all the way here just to thank me." Olivia looked down at her own cup, stirring cream into her latte with more attention than the task required. Not just to thank you, to apologize. You already apologized. At my apartment. That was in front of everyone. This is different. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. On the plane, when I thought I was going to die, I had a lot of time to think. About my life, my choices, what I would regret if I never got another chance. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I realized that I have spent years building walls, judging people before they can judge me, pushing everyone away because it is safer than letting them in. My marriage failed because I was more committed to my career than my family. My ex-husband was wrong to leave the way he did, but he was not wrong about everything. Nathan listened without interrupting, sensing that she needed to say this. When I looked at you at the airport, I saw someone I could dismiss. Economy class, worn clothes, not the kind of person who mattered in my world. And that is what I had become. Someone who measured worth by airplane seats and designer labels. Her voice cracked. I'm ashamed of who I was, of who I have been for years. People can change, Nathan said quietly. Can they? She looked at him with something like hope. Because I want to. I have already started. I turned down the London account. Told my company I needed to restructure my priorities. I am going to be home more, be present for Sophie more, be the mother she deserves. That sounds like change to me. Olivia smiled, fragile, but real. What about you? How are you really? Nathan considered the question, gave it the honest answer it deserved. I am better than I have been in a long time. The flight changed something in me too. I have spent 3 years hiding from who I used to be, feeling guilty for surviving when my wife did not, for being happy when she is not here to share it. He glanced toward the window, where sunlight was streaming through the glass. Catherine made me promise before she died that I would find happiness again. I told her I would, but I did not believe it. I did not think I deserved it. He looked back at Olivia. Landing that plane, hearing Emma's voice over the chaos, holding her when it was over. It reminded me that I am still alive, That being alive means something. Olivia reached across the table and touched his hand. Just a brief contact, her fingers brushing his knuckles. I am glad you are alive, Nathan Cole, and I am glad I got to meet you. From the booth nearby, they heard Emma's voice carrying in the way children's voices do when they forget to use inside volume. I think my dad likes your mom. Sophie's response was equally audible. I think my mom likes your dad too. Nathan and Olivia looked at each other and burst out laughing, the tension breaking into something warmer, easier, more possible. Kids, Olivia said, shaking her head. They see everything, Nathan agreed. There was a pause, and then Olivia spoke again, her voice soft but clear. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Just the two of us. I mean the four of us, probably. Since I do not think those two are going to let us separate them for long. But also, just us. Nathan thought about Catherine, about the promise he had made. Find happiness again. She needs you. Happy, not just present. He thought about the walls he had built, the years of isolation, the way he had convinced himself that love was a one-time gift he had already used up. And he thought about this woman sitting across from him, beautiful and broken, and trying so hard to change, offering him something he had not allowed himself to want. I would like that, he said. I would like that very much. The restaurant Olivia chose was neither fancy nor casual, striking a balance that suggested she had thought carefully about the impression she wanted to make. It was warm, intimate, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting that made everything look gentle. Nathan had worn actual nice clothes for the first time in longer than he could remember. Emma had helped him pick them out, standing in his closet with the serious expression of a fashion consultant evaluating her client's options. The blue shirt, Dad. It makes your eyes look nice. Now sitting across from Olivia, who wore a beautiful navy dress that made her blonde hair seem to glow. Nathan was glad he had listened to his 7-year-old fashion advisor. You look beautiful, he said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. Olivia's smile was pleased, but also somehow vulnerable. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. They ordered wine, made small talk about the menu, and then fell into the kind of conversation that happened when two people decided to be genuinely honest with each other. Tell me about Catherine, Olivia said, and it was not a casual question. I mean, if you are comfortable. I know it must be hard. Nathan took a sip of his wine, gathering his thoughts. She was sunshine. That is the only way I can describe her. She walked into a room and everything got brighter. She laughed at my terrible jokes. She made burnt pancakes taste good somehow. She loved Emma with every fiber of her being. He paused, the memories washing over him. When she got sick, she never complained. Not once. She spent her last months making sure Emma and I would be okay without her. Recorded videos for Emma's birthdays, her graduation, her wedding day. Wrote letters that I have not been able to read yet. His voice cracked. She was braver than I have ever been. Olivia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She sounds incredible. She was. And I think... Nathan took a breath. I think she would have liked you. She always told me I was too hard on myself, that I deserved good things. She would have wanted me to be here tonight. The conversation shifted, and Olivia shared her own story. The marriage that had started with such promise and eroded into silence and resentment. The divorce that had left her feeling like a failure despite all her professional success. The years of burying herself in work because it was easier than confronting what she had lost. I told myself that I was being strong, she admitted. That focusing on my career was empowering, feminist, the right choice. But really, I was just scared. Scared that if I let anyone get close again, they would leave too. So I pushed everyone away first, including Sophie. The question hit a nerve and Olivia flinched. Yes, she whispered, not intentionally. Never intentionally. But yes, I was not present enough. I was always at the office, always on a call, always chasing the next deal. The nanny saw her first steps, not me. The nanny helped her through her first day of school. I told myself it was temporary, that I was building a better life for us, but... She trailed off, unable to finish. We make mistakes, Nathan said gently. The important thing is that we try to do better. That is what I am trying to do." Olivia met his eyes, and there was determination in her gaze alongside the vulnerability. "That is why I turned down the London account. That is why I am restructuring my work schedule. That is why I am here with you, trying to be a person instead of a job title." They talked for hours long after their plates were cleared and their wine glasses refilled, about parenting and loss and the strange, unexpected ways that life could break you down and build you back up, about Sophie and Emma and the instant friendship that had formed between them, about hopes they had forgotten they had and fears they had never admitted out loud. When the check finally came, neither of them wanted the evening to end. Nathan walked Olivia to her car, the night air cool and clean, the streets quiet in the way that late evenings always are in residential neighborhoods. "Thank you," Olivia said, turning to face him in the glow of a streetlight. "Not just for dinner. For this. For listening. For not judging me for who I was." "We all have chapters we are not proud of," Nathan replied. "The question is whether we keep writing." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she stepped closer, rose on her toes, and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Nathan's hand came up to cup her face, his fingers brushing through her hair, and he answered the question with his own lips. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I have not felt like this in a long time," Olivia whispered. "Neither have I." There was still a lot of distance to cover, Nathan knew. Scars that needed healing and trust that needed building, and lives that needed to be woven together with care. But standing there in the streetlight with Olivia's hand in his and the taste of her lips still lingering, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The months that followed were a kind of magic Nathan had stopped believing in. He and Olivia took things slowly, carefully, both of them too aware of their own damage to rush into anything that might break. But slowly, carefully, something beautiful grew between them. Weekly dinners became daily phone calls. Separate family outings became shared adventures. The girls Emma and Sophie bonded with, the instant intensity of children who had found kindred spirits, and their insistence on spending time together created natural opportunities for their parents to do the same. They went to the zoo, all four of them, watching the girls run from exhibit to exhibit, while Nathan and Olivia walked behind their hands, occasionally brushing in a way that felt both accidental and intentional. They had picnics in the park, Sophie teaching Emma to draw animals while Nathan and Olivia spread out on the blanket, talking about everything and nothing. They hosted sleepovers, the girls camping in Emma's room in a fortress of pillows and blankets, while Nathan and Olivia stayed up late on the couch, sharing quiet conversations that felt more intimate than anything that might happen in a bedroom. 6 months after the flight, Olivia practically lived at Nathan's apartment. Her toothbrush had appeared in his bathroom. Her clothes had migrated into his closet. Her presence had seeped into every corner of his life, and Nathan found that he did not want to imagine existing without it. One evening, while Olivia was helping Sophie with homework at the kitchen table, Emma pulled Nathan aside. "Dad." Her voice was serious, her expression the kind of thoughtful that made her look older than 7. "Do you love Olivia?" Nathan considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "Yes, sweetheart. I do." Emma nodded as if she had known the answer already. "Good. I think Mommy would like her. Mommy wanted you to be happy, and Olivia makes you happy. I can tell." Nathan's eyes burned. He knelt down to Emma's level, cupping her face in his hands. "How did you get to be so wise?" Emma grinned. "Mommy told me to take care of you. She said you would need help sometimes, because you are not very good at feelings." A laugh escaped Nathan, watery, but genuine. She was not wrong about that. Also, Emma added, her grin widening. "Sophie said, if you marry her mom, we will be sisters. And I really want a sister." Nathan pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against his chest. "I will see what I can do about that." The next day, Olivia came home from work, and Nathan noticed something different about her. A lightness in her step, a peace in her expression that had not been there when they first met. "I did something today," she said, settling onto the couch beside him. "Something I should have done a long time ago." "What is that?" "I resigned from my position as VP, took a consulting role instead. Flexible hours, remote work, half the responsibility." She took his hand. "I want to be here, really here, for Sophie, for Emma, for you. I spent so many years chasing something that never made me happy. I do not want to do that anymore." Nathan squeezed her hand, his heart full to bursting. "That is incredibly brave." "I had a good teacher," she smiled. "A man who walked away from a brilliant career to be a present father, who showed me what really matters." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the girls play in the other room, and Nathan felt a peace he had not known since Catherine died. Not a replacement, never a replacement, but a new beginning. A different love built on different foundations, beautiful in its own way. He thought about visiting Catherine's grave, something he had done only a few times since her death. He had avoided it, he realized now, because he had been avoiding the grief, running from the pain instead of moving through it. "I want you to meet someone," he said quietly. Olivia looked at him understanding immediately. "I would be honored." They went on a Saturday morning, all four of them. The cemetery was peaceful green grass and old trees, and the particular silence of places where the dead rest. Nathan led them to Catherine's headstone, a simple marker bearing her name and the dates of her too short life. "Catherine," he said softly, "I want you to meet Olivia. And Sophie. They are part of our family now." Olivia knelt beside the grave, her expression solemn and sincere. "I promise to take care of them," she whispered. "Nathan and Emma. I will love them the way they deserve, and I will make sure Emma always knows how incredible her mother was." Emma placed a flower on the grave, a daisy she had picked from the garden that morning. "Hi, Mommy. I miss you. But I am okay. Daddy found happiness like you wanted. And I got a sister almost. Her name is Sophie, and she is really nice. You would like her." They stood together, the four of them, in the quiet of the cemetery, and Nathan felt something shift. Not closure, exactly. The grief would always be there, a tender place in his heart that would never fully heal. But alongside the grief, there was room now for joy, for love, for the future Catherine had wanted him to have. He took Olivia's hand in his, looked at their daughters, standing together, and knew with certainty that Catherine was smiling down on them. 1 year after the flight that had brought them together, Nathan knew it was time. The ring had been in his pocket for 3 weeks, burning a hole through the fabric with its presence. Emma and Sophie had been involved in the planning, sworn to secrecy with the solemn seriousness of children entrusted with important missions. "When are you going to ask her?" Sophie demanded at least once a day. "When are you going to ask her?" Emma echoed, equally impatient. "Soon," Nathan promised. Very soon. He chose the park where they had had their first family picnic a year ago, when everything was still new and tentative. It was autumn now, the trees ablaze with color leaves falling like confetti from a celebration that never ended. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon, the four of them, baskets of food and blankets for sitting. Nathan's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Olivia could hear it. The girls ran ahead looking for something they said, with the exaggerated innocence of children who were terrible at keeping secrets. Olivia watched them go with a fond smile. "Those two are up to something." Probably Nathan agreed, his voice steadier than he felt. "They are always up to something." He led her to the spot by the pond, the place where they had sat a year ago, while Emma and Sophie splashed in the shallow water, and their lives began to weave together. "Do you remember this place?" Nathan asked. "Of course. Our first picnic as a whatever we were then. Not quite a family. Not quite friends. Something in between." And now Olivia smiled. "Now we are everything." Nathan took her hands in his, and he saw the moment she realized something was different about this conversation. Her eyes widened slightly, her breath catching. "Olivia," he began, and his voice was steady now, the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. A year ago, I was asleep in seat 8A when the captain asked if any combat pilots were on board. I woke up and made a choice that changed everything, not just for the people on that plane. For me. He paused, gathering the words that had been building in his heart for months. I spent 3 years hiding from life, keeping a promise to a dying woman while ignoring the other promise she made me make. Find happiness again, she said, and I could not. Not until I met you. Olivia's eyes were shining with tears now, but she was smiling. You taught me that it is possible to love again without betraying what I lost. You showed me that the heart does not divide its love, it multiplies it. You gave Emma a sister and me a partner, and all of us a family. Nathan sank to one knee, and from behind the nearby trees, 2 small faces appeared, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Will you marry us?" I am not just asking for me. Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. I am asking for all 4 of us. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Emma's stepmother and Sophie's? Well, Sophie's mom, but also part of something bigger. Will you be our family? Olivia was crying openly now, but she was also laughing, the sound bright and joyful and full of everything Nathan had ever wanted to hear. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet. Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes! He kissed her, and behind them, the girls erupted in cheers, running forward to tackle them both in a hug that was more collision than embrace. Does this mean we are sisters now? Sophie asked breathlessly. It means we are a family. Nathan set his arms around all 3 of them. A real official, forever family. Emma looked up at him with Catherine's eyes, and she was smiling. Mommy would be so happy, Daddy. Nathan held his daughter, his future wife, his soon-to-be stepdaughter, and he knew she was right. They married in the same park, where Nathan had proposed on a golden afternoon 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, intimate and perfect. The guests were people who mattered: Grace Harper, who had become a family friend; Bradley Thornton, who had given a surprisingly touching toast at the engagement party; Howard Brennan, the retired pilot, who had tried his best when best was not enough; passengers from Flight 227, who had become part of their story. Emma and Sophie walked down the aisle together. Flower girls in matching dresses, scattering petals with the concentrated seriousness of children performing an important duty. Nathan stood at the altar, watching Olivia walk toward him in a simple white dress that made her look like everything he had ever wanted, and nothing he had ever expected. The officiant spoke of second chances of love found in unexpected places of families built not by blood, but by choice. And when it came time for vows, Nathan and Olivia spoke from the heart. I used to think my greatest accomplishment was landing a crippled plane, Nathan said. I was wrong. My greatest accomplishment is standing here choosing to love again, choosing to let myself be happy. Olivia's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I spent years judging people by appearances. Then I met a man in a hoodie who taught me what a hero really looks like. I promise to see you, Nathan, the real you, every single day for the rest of our lives. They kissed, and Emma and Sophie cheered and everyone applauded, and Nathan felt for the first time since Catherine died that his heart was whole. That evening, the new family of 4 sat on the rooftop of Nathan's apartment building, looking out at the city lights spread below them and the stars emerging above. Sophie was asleep in Olivia's lap, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Emma leaned against Nathan, her head on his shoulder, in the same position she had been in on that fateful flight, but everything else was different now. Dad? Emma's voice was sleepy, but content. Do you miss flying? Nathan looked up at the sky at the stars that had once been his home. I found something better, sweetheart. The sky was my home once. Now home is right here with all of you. Olivia took his hand, squeezed gently. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think Mom is watching? Nathan felt the familiar ache tender, but no longer raw. I know she is, and I think she is happy. I think she has been waiting for this. I think so too, Emma murmured. I think she sent us Olivia and Sophie, like a present from heaven. Olivia's eyes glistened in the starlight. "Thank you, Catherine," she whispered. "For him, for Emma, for everything." They sat together in comfortable silence, 4 people who had been broken and alone, now whole and together. The city hummed below them. The stars shone above. And Nathan Cole, who had once been Ghost, who had saved 283 lives over the Atlantic Ocean, who had kept his promises to a dying wife and found happiness again, knew that he was finally truly home. A hero is not the person who flies the highest. A hero is the person who knows the way home. And that night, with his daughter in his arms and his wife beside him, and a future bright with possibility, Nathan understood that the greatest flight of his life had not been the one that made him famous. It was the one that brought him here. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you heartwarming stories every week. Stories about second chances, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe they are going through a hard time. Maybe they have forgotten that heroes do not always wear capes. Maybe they just need a reminder that it is never too late to find happiness again. And tell us in the comments, what does home mean to you? We read every single comment, and your stories inspire us to keep creating content that lifts your spirit. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of our community. And remember, sometimes the most extraordinary people look the most ordinary. Keep your eyes open. Keep your heart open. You never know when you might meet someone who changes everything. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.